Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Ohio-born, New York City-based jazz trombonist and composer Sam Blakeslee. He opened up about his new 2021 CD, The Long Middle. Since his arrival in New York City in August of 2017, he has performed at iconic jazz clubs like the 55 Bar, Smalls, Birdland, Zinc Bar, and the Blue Note, along with gigging with the likes of Joe Lovano, Dick Oatts, Ingrid, Jensen, and the great Derrick Gardner. He's got a very rich, good story. Enjoy.
Oh, man, doing great. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet. Thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
No problem.
First and foremost, let's talk about your new single, The Long Middle. Almost seems like maybe an epitaph for the last year and a half we've lived on planet Earth here.
Definitely.
See what the meaning behind it was, and to kind of open up about the music.
I kind of noticed this really strange passing of time in the shutdown, especially in New York, where isolation was maybe a little bit more intensified. I found time going really slowly and really quickly all at the same time, but there was definitely this, it's by far the longest that I didn't make music with anyone. I think I had gone maybe 3 or 4 days before COVID without making music with someone, And all of a sudden, when we recorded the album, that was the first time, and we recorded in August, and that was the first time in the shutdown that we had made music. I had made music with anybody. So it was this really cathartic moment to finally be able to get together and do it. And I think it also it kind of was enhanced by the distance between the band members. The group was kind of formed almost flippantly. We had a good performance opportunity in Ohio for a tour that was supposed to happen in mid-March 2020, which 2 days before we were supposed to go, everything got shut down. So everything was right on the precipice of getting recorded and getting performed, and then nothing, So The Long Middle was actually the last composition before we went into the studio. And I think it just kind of highlights that sentiment of yearning and isolation, and both geographically and socially, and all these kind of weird mixed bag of emotions that we were subjected to, basically.
And now we look at the other side of it to a certain degree. Life is picking back up, music starting back up. How's everything looking for you as the world wakes up?
It's getting back to it. It's really refreshing. It's nice to see in New York that I've already been immediately losing track of who's playing where and and when, and it's just so great to see my friends getting back to being able to do creative work as well as have their livelihoods back, and myself included, and it's a nice change of pace, definitely.
Well, how do you see the world of jazz coming back stronger now that we've gone through this? Anything that has been emblematic of what jazz has done to stay alive and stay relevant? How do you think that's going to bode for musicians as we return to stage and the studio?
I feel like before the shutdown, people just took the arts in general for granted. There was always something to go see or hear or a museum to go to, and then when all of that goes away, I think people just felt this void. And I think that's what's kind of creating this boom that's happening across the country of not just music happening, but creative music and new forms of music. I think that, before the shutdown, I didn't have a microphone. I didn't know how to use Logic. I didn't know how to edit videos. All of these things that we were all of a sudden expected to be able to know how to do. So I'm actually really intrigued with the intersection of more electronic music, kind of when we were stuck at home with everyone bought synths and, was making their beats and things like that. And I think that it's going to create just kind of a new thread that people can go down because of just the skills that we were forced to kind of get together. I play in a lot of big bands and small groups, and I didn't realize that before the shutdown, I was like 99% of the time an acoustic musician. Whereas now there's I feel like everyone has a much larger bag that they can pull from. So I'm really excited to see what happens as we continue to embrace that in the, post-shutdown world.
So as a guy from Columbus, Ohio, relatively Midwestern, talk to me a little bit about how the roots of jazz and music got sprinkled in you. And, the trombone, too, is a rather unique instrument.
Well, I'll start with the trombone. I started playing in fourth grade, and my mom played trombone in high school and actually still had my grandpa's trombone. He wasn't a professional musician, but pretty good amateur one. And when time came around to sign up for beginning band, she said, we have a clarinet or a trombone. You pick which one you want to play. And at times I also studied piano and played a little guitar in high school. I was lucky enough in my senior year of high school to get into the Columbus Youth Jazz Orchestra. And that was really the big awakening for jazz. I mean, I'll never forget the first chart we played was the Gerald Wilson arrangement of Perdido. And up until that point, I was just playing in the high school jazz band, but it was more or less, watered down high school charts. And this was the real material. And I just will never forget the feeling that when the director counted off the first chart, what that created. So since then, it's kind of been, all downhill from there. But something on this project in particular is kind of trying to tap back into, like I was really into blues guitar and folk music and some bluegrass stuff. So there's definitely some tinges of that that I'm trying to reconnect with in this project.
So what about musicians? Who was really swaying you when you were getting into jazz?
Coming from like the blues guitar, Jimi Hendrix, B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of background, the first trombonist that I heard that really made my ears perk up was Wycliffe Gordon, who's coming from a real soulful gospel kind of perspective. So I kind of entered into jazz through that lens and then found out about J.J. Johnson and then the people that he kind of influenced, like Curtis Fuller and Slide Hampton, and then the next generation of Steve Davis and Conrad Herwig and people like that. But I also lived with saxophone players for like my entire 6 years of schooling. Pretty early on in college, I got exposed to Kenny Garrett, and I always loved Sonny Rollins. And so there's tons of saxophone influences that I tend to gravitate towards as well.
What about the first live show that you ever saw that really blew your doors down?
That probably would have been B.B. King, actually, because that was the first person that I really started trying to play along with before I knew even transcribing was a tool for learning. And I was really obsessed with it. The Cook County, or live in Cook County Jail especially, I just listened to that forever. And my parents bought me tickets, and that was like the first, I think I was in ninth grade or somewhere around there. And that was like the first concert that I went to where it was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do in music, but this is awesome, and I want to keep pursuing it as much as I can.
So talk to me a little bit about your path to New York. Was that always a dream of yours to make it and get to New York City?
And a lot of it just came from a young age. The director of the Columbus Youth Jazz Orchestra, who's now the director of education at Lincoln Center, Todd Stoll, he was always pushing people to just make the move at some point. It doesn't have to be when you're 18 or any specific age, but just to be able to test your skills out on that proving ground. And I moved a little later. I moved when I was 27. I ended up getting some teaching jobs at some adjunct teaching jobs at colleges after I finished up school in Ohio, so I stuck around for a bit. But it's great to be here, and specifically I moved here to want to absorb like the contemporary big band scene where there's really great, regional big bands all across the country, but the depth of players here and the depth of different types of ensembles is just, it's kind of unfathomable, and that's still just been a real treat to be able to surround myself with that here.
What was it like when you played in like Birdland or any of those premier clubs for the first time in New York?
It was a good nervous, it's kind of spooky. You have listened to so many records there, and I've seen shows there, but then all of a sudden when you're on the other side of it, it definitely has a reverence that is tough to duplicate, I think, outside of New York, just because when you're taking the stage, so many of your heroes and so many luminaries have been in the same place. So that's one of the things that is just I'm so grateful about, that things are popping back up, because I think for a long time during the shutdown, so many of those clubs were really struggling. And unfortunately, like places like the Standard did close, and hopefully they'll reopen, but it's just so great to see that a lot of the landmark places were able to hang on and make it through. So
when you look at what you've had to go through personally throughout this pandemic, how do you think you're going to emerge stronger? What did you learn about yourself over this time that's just going to make you a better musician?
I guess the longer that the shutdown went on, I just kind of was expecting myself to start caring about music less. There was this, if I don't have gigs, if I'm not quote unquote working, then I'll lose interest at some point. And sure, there was some, waves of that throughout the shutdown. But generally, I just kept coming back to the horn, and I kept coming back to composing music, and I just realized that that's more a part of me than I even really realized before, because it's kind of easy to get lost in the shuffle of trying to get gigs, trying to keep gigs, trying to play gigs that make you money, trying to play gigs that make you happy here. So it can be really, the pace can be really overwhelming. I just was kind of, it became a good point of relief almost from everything, to just dig more and more into my own writing and to my playing, and kind of letting whatever way the wind blows in what my interests were. I was kind of shocked at some things that I spent time on. I got really obsessed with Bach cello suites, and then I got really obsessed with electronic music. One thing that was really reaffirming in all that is that that's kind of the way it's supposed to be regardless. We're artists, and it's supposed to be fun, and it was really amazing to just kind of have some time to re-clarify what is really important. So that I'm just trying to take those things with me as much as I can going forward. But.
Talk to me a little bit about, if you had the access to a time machine, you could go back in time and you could see any show anywhere. Who would you go see, and who would you want to talk to afterwards?
Well, I don't know if I'd be able to get to talk to him, because he'd probably be practicing as soon as the gig was over. But I would have loved to hear the Coltrane Quartet at the Vanguard, the stuff with Dolphy or his Elvin and McCoy. Those recordings for me are just so idyllic, and there's a spiritualism in it that I think is just, it's really once in 100 years or more. And that's what I would want to see. Yeah.
So very simply put, why do you love jazz?
I love it because I just feel like it's an open vehicle. Maybe this is overused, but it's an open vehicle for expression. And at this point, it's an open book. I consider it, every type of jazz is a fusion of sorts. There's people who are fusing, South American music into jazz, and there's people who are fusing classical music into jazz, and people who are fusing electronic music into jazz. And I just love how it's this kind of infinite playground that you can choose from. And especially being in New York, there's always people that you can find that do whatever type of style or what they might have affinity for at an incredibly high level. So that's what I really like about it, is just kind of feeling like you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, and then all of a sudden you hear a band or you get to play some composer's music, and it's just stuff like you've never heard. And it's just exciting to be a small part of it as much as I can.
So you've had the chance over your career to play with the likes of Joe Lovano, Dick Oatts, Chris Coles, Derrick Gardner. There's been a lot of names that you've played with. What have you learned from them that have in turn helped you teach younger players that you get around? And
the opportunities I've gotten to play with people like that, I think it just shows the importance of having one foot in the past and one foot in the future. I think it's really easy to want, when there's so much musical expectation, to want to skip steps, especially as a younger player, and just skip over these huge parts of history. I've come across big band writers that can't name their favorite Duke Ellington chart or something like that. And I think that when you get around those types of players, you realize what their depth of listening is and what their depth of understanding is. There's no steps skipped, and they play with a certain conviction because of that understanding of the history, with the aim of creating something new. So I think that is what I take away most from those types of artists.
Well, everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. Who do you think you are?
Oh, wow. I think, and maybe this was something that was reaffirmed in the shutdown, but I think that at the heart of it, I'm a composer, more so than even a trombonist. At this point, I'm just trying to synthesize the different styles of music that I've enjoyed at different parts of my life, and not ignore others I think there's can be a tendency in jazz to turn your nose down at certain things, but my musical development didn't start the minute I started playing jazz. And I think that I'm just trying to use the trombone as a vehicle for those kind of forms of compositional expression at this point, rather than just being a trombonist or just being a composer. But it's definitely, I think, a little challenging to hold on to, art with a capital A, and the social media phase and everything that we're in, because we want people to engage. But my main goal, I guess, is just trying to be as honest as possible and hope to find people that, dig that. So
when we do return to live music, when you get back on the stage and we're back in the audience, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music when we do return in earnest?
I hope people realize that there is an energy to live music that just cannot be replicated. And I think that it's, I spoke on the development of, skills with home recording and everything that are really useful tools, and I did a couple remote big band things, and they came out really clean and polished and, shiny. But there's a certain energy that you just cannot recreate. And the performances that I've done so far in New York since then, that's what has been at the forefront of my mind, that, human connection on the bandstand and then human connection with the audience members is something really special. And I just think back to all the times that I went to really impactful shows with my friends, and we were the audience members, but, we're close. We became closer because of that experience. And I think it's such a mutually beneficial thing for both the performers and the audience that when that was taken away, we almost realized how important that was to a greater degree.
That was a great answer. Great way to wrap everything up. Hey, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. Good luck with the album and the return stage.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Columbus, Ohio, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Sam for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.